Hi, and this is next episode of Pajama Talks, and today our guest is Andrew Fitz Gibbon. Hey, Fitz.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining in. And Fitz is a developer advocate at Google at Flutter team. Just completely imaginary situation. You are in the bar, drunk, but a really friendly stranger asks you, "So, what do you do?" And you're trying to explain, like, developer advocate. What's that?
I would tell them that I teach professional programmers how to program with a specific thing a little bit better.
And why they should listen to you? Because they are already professionals.
They should listen to because for them, that might be something new. It might be a new concept. It might be a new tool. It does things a little bit differently than maybe what you're used to. And maybe it does things a little bit better in some ways, a little bit worse in some other ways. But my job is to be the expert in the thing and help this other person or this other team learn how to use this tool.
I've heard this opinion that why do we need special people, special positions for that? Because why not just read documentation?
And documentation has, in many cases, very defined areas of discussion. You either have the API reference documentation, which in some cases the engineers themselves will write. But then there's, beyond that, just that reference documentation that tells you what the thing is, there's the how to plug it together with something else. There's why should I use it? There is when should I use it? And all of these things build up into a much larger suite of documentation. But then documentation is only one format. It can be really daunting to see this 20-page document that talks through all of the concepts of the thing you're trying to learn. And it'd be much nicer in sometimes to have a video or a talk or something where someone is actually breaking it down into something that makes sense for you because you came from some other tool. You had the screwdriver and you're coming to the drill or whatever it is. And knowing that, I can describe things to you in a slightly different way than the documentation, which is generally going to be fully comprehensive and covering everything.
Have you ever dreamed like to be in this position? Because I know that you was a developer advocate before. Then you got to manager in developer relations at Google, and then came back to the senior developer advocate.
I'm trying to give people the tools and the knowledge and the ability to themselves succeed. And as a developer advocate, the tools that I'm giving them are technical. You know, I'm giving them Flutter and I'm giving them Android and I'm giving them cloud and whatever it is. If I'm a manager, I'm giving them performance improvement, coaching on how to do the job and how to do developer relations and how to interact with other developer relations people and product managers and all of that. In all of that, the goal is to help other people succeed and find ways to succeed for themselves.
When you're a developer, your kind of like happiness or satisfaction comes from developing stuff. Do you miss that? Like kind of like you're building a product that you can touch, you can, I don't know, present to someone, or developer advocates doing the same thing, but from different angle?
We still do launch things and we still do have projects that we focus on. For example, my colleague Philip is focused on how do we teach people how to have more performant code. It just happens to be a little bit more jumpy between thing to thing when I might go from, say, teaching new developers how to use the thing and then going to teaching things like performance or really nitty-gritty backend down in the weeds sort of things.
When I was in university, I always thought that it can be really boring from the teacher perspective. Every year you got new students, but still the materials, maybe in programming it's not the same, but in more fundamental things, I don't know, physics or something like this. And again, for Flutter, for example, we see that a lot of people coming to this area, and you have to repeat yourself and explaining same things, or it's not true, and you always kind of like tweaking materials.
Certainly always tweaking materials. I think the first time you say something is never the right one. But it's also a little bit of a challenge to think that every time I say that thing, it's being received by someone different. Maybe I said it in a particular way, used a particular analogy that really worked well for the person I said it to in that moment. There are certain phrases or words or concepts that come obvious to me. Like I know what a widget is in a build context, and an element and a widget tree and render objects, and like this jargon that comes from the Flutter world. And I know these things and I know these concepts. And as you get even more familiar with them, you kind of gloss over descriptions and you gloss over some things, and you start taking shortcuts because they make sense to you. And that's part of the learning process, is actually create these shortcuts, is your brain generates shortcuts. That is learning. And you have to like actively rewire yourself every time you are talking to someone who doesn't know all that jargon and doesn't have those shortcuts yet. And so I see it as a little bit of a challenge in some ways to make sure that I'm checking myself and checking that so-called expert blindness, and making sure that I'm actually able to teach people in a way that's approachable to them based on the knowledge that they know, even though it's become second hat to me.
IT world is super international, and English is not a primary language for actually most of the developers in the world. Do you ever feel like you have to kind of, I will not say simplify, but still making some changes according to the audience? Because I remember one story. I spoke with some guy and he used idiom walking in my shoes. And I'm like scratching my head, like, what does it mean? He want to walk in my shoes?
Right.
Yeah, it was kind of strange. So do you ever feel like you should kind of use other words or other idioms?
I didn't grow up on the West Coast in the US of tech industry. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in middle eastern half of the US. And like the things that I grew up with are different than things that other people grew up with. And even just interacting with people who are native speakers, I do have to kind of think about the idioms and the phrases that I use. I do try to keep that in mind with the language that I use. And we check ourselves in the scripts that we write and the talks that we write as well, to make sure that the memes we use or the phrases we use are going to make sense to people. We're still talking about a complex thing potentially. And so it's not necessarily simplifying the concept down or simplifying the explanation down. I'm just going to use different words.
Speaking of the computer science and languages, so you're a teacher in University of Washington, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
And what do you teach?
Teaching a web programming course. So doing a lot of JavaScript. Next year, one quarter, I'll be teaching an intro programming course using Python. And neither of those are Dart, as you might have noticed. I think there's a variety of reasons for choosing one language over another in whatever context you're in. But those are the ones that I've been working on recently.
There is like a kind of conversation between old school programmers, and they're saying like, hey, you young people, you should learn some like concepts like theoretical programming, computer science. And there is other like kind of group of people who think, I will learn algorithms and other stuff, other theoretical stuff when I need it, but I will begin from Python.
That can sometimes be true. That can often be true because you want to be able to have this foundation of computing and of processing and of being able to know how to manipulate data and manipulate the computer to processing that data in a particular way. But is it necessary to getting a programming job? Maybe not. I don't know. There's a lot of different programming jobs out there that ask for a lot of different things. And is someone a lesser programmer because they learned Python outside of school and got a junior Python programmer job? I don't think so. Not at all. They have totally different skills than someone else. Maybe there is a job. Maybe like if you wanted to get into a team that's building compilers or building VMs or anything like that, then yeah, maybe those algorithms are a little bit more important. But even then, there's still programming tasks and coding tasks and things that can be done without having or being able to learn some of those things on the job.
If I'm really new to the programming languages or like IT, what's better for me to start doing something that I'm really interested in? I don't know, doing my first Flutter application in 5 minutes or maybe 5 hours, or learning some really complicated books like I don't know, my finger's gonna be full of dust of knowledge, but still maybe it's not that interesting.
One of the things in education and in teaching and in learning is that motivation plays a huge part of it as well. And if you aren't motivated or inspired to learn the thing, then you're not going to retain it as well, and you're not going to learn it as well. And then also make it so that it can handle. It's not just a project management interface for one project, but one for thousands or millions of projects, because we're going to launch this as a large thing. And so now you're dealing with very, very small data and very large data, but you're solving a problem. More people are going to be interested in that than sitting down and reading this highly theoretical, abstract textbook.
And talking about motivation, so when you're a developer, usually you don't stick to one project or one technology for like years. But as a developer advocate, do you feel that you are tied to one technology, for example, to Flutter, because you're a developer advocate for Flutter, and most of the time you should kind of develop in Flutter, or maybe area of your interest is in Flutter. Do you feel that it kind of limits you as a developer, maybe, or as a kind of IT person?
I'm learning how to build user interfaces and then have state pass between the different things in the user interface. I'm learning how to explain things to people and teach people. And I'm learning new features in the Dart language that are continually coming out, and the language is evolving. And so I have to learn how to evolve my programming as the thing that I'm using is also evolving. And so I'm learning these things that are not necessarily specific to Flutter. I'm learning processes and how to learn and how to think about things. And that's transferable. That you can take from one thing to another thing without any problem at all.
What was your way to this position, like in Google?
I was a software engineer. The fun thing for that one was that team used Java pretty extensively for all of their backend microservices and whatnot. Before starting that job, I didn't know Java because, as mentioned earlier, my CS degree was in C, so we didn't do really any object-oriented things. What I found was that just being a software engineer, and this relates to our previous conversation, it was missing something that I wanted. It was missing being able to teach people and help people who are not immediately around me. And so I was missing some of that, and it kind of led me meandering over into something that looks a little bit closer to developer relations, and then ended up interviewing at Google and got this job.
There is a kind of like stereotypical thing that developers usually not that great at public speaking, presenting all this thing, but they great in developing stuff. Is it true?
It's a false and potentially harmful stereotype these days, because developers are not one type of person. There is this implied and sometimes not so implied, but very, very specific and explicit expectation that now you know how to program, so you're going to become a software engineer. Period. End of sentence. Nothing else. Nothing else in the industry exists. Once you know how to program, that's it. You are that. That's not quite true, right? There's a lot of variation in what you can do once you know how to program. I do talk to a lot of people who are like, yeah, I never even knew that this developer relations thing was even possible, let alone that it existed. And so I truly believe that even though much of the industry prefers senior level people to go into developer relations, I truly believe that there is room for junior developer advocates, entry level, coming right out of wherever they're coming out of, to enter into developer relations. in large part because it's more than just sharing expertise. It's also about enabling other people to be successful with the thing that you're working on. And there's a lot of coding that has to go into making that happen as well. And in many cases, it doesn't require any expertise.
You will be interviewing some person to a developer advocate position. What kind of skills do you prefer?
The skills that I'm looking for are more around, can you understand where someone else is coming from? I am not the user of the product that I am a developer advocate for. I need to understand the friction and the pain and the hardships that they encounter using this thing so that I can try to make them better. I need to know what it means to try to make it better. I need to know what sorts of mental hurdles that people might have to climb over in order to be able to understand this thing that they're working on. If you come from Android, things are going to be different than different here than they are there, right? And so can I make those connections myself in order to help other people make those connections as well? See, I do expect people to be able to code. But nowhere in there did I talk about algorithms and data structures and deep theory. I also didn't talk about presenting. I kind of did, right? Talking about explaining things to people and breaking them down in a way that is going to be understandable to them. Some kind of cross in the middle where we bring in some understanding of other people's experiences and being able to you used a phrase potentially off camera earlier of walking in the other's shoes, and that's important, and that's a big part of this.
Some companies, they're searching for a developer advocate, but actually they searching for a recruiter or / public relations or something like this.
There's a lot of different variations on the developer advocate role as we know it. When you're out looking at developer relations and developer advocacy roles, the few variations that I most commonly see are, we are in engineering. We report into the engineering, we report to the CTO or director of engineering or whatever it is. And that's our developer relations team. Or we might say, we report into the product organization. The VP of product is going to be your boss or whatever. A third one, and this starts to slide into that other area that you implied. Then we have you're reporting into marketing, and then there's the reporting into sales, and then there's the I've actually never heard of the technical recruiter one, but that's really interesting. I can see how people get there, but there's all these different places that developer advocate can show up.
Some people will discuss that React Native or like native applications are main competitors, but still it is arguably hard to say what's wrong with Flutter. So what do you think, like, is it that great? I mean, maybe it's the wrong person to ask, but still, how do you feel where Flutter is now?
Flutter is at this point of actually being used in production apps. I think for a long time it's been, and this is part of where some of the disagreement about Flutter comes in the broader community, is saying like, oh, it's just been used for prototyping apps and for doing just things that look cool but aren't necessarily useful for whatever that means. And I think one of the things we're seeing is quite a bit of growth into Flutter being actually used in production apps. There's a lot of things that we have to learn as it grows that way. There are things that have been in market for much longer and have figured out all of the dark, scary edge corners that have these, horrible spider webs of not being able to get certain things to work, right? And we don't know all of those corners. We know they exist, and so they do exist, and we're figuring them out, and we're focused on trying to find those.
Do you think, can we reach this point when Flutter will be, I don't know, 10th version of Flutter, and like an old dinosaur, it cannot handle itself because it's too big? And
yeah, we see a lot of other platforms where you have to make sure that your code compiles on version 24 and on 23 and on 22 and on 21 all the way down. And where I think Flutter is a little bit different is you don't necessarily have to support all versions, just the one that you're targeting.
I can imagine that it is extremely hard to find a way through the, I don't know, through the forest of requests, because I don't know, just imagine 1,000 people will request 2,000 features, and it is extremely hard to find kind of like a middle way between everything. How do you find it, and what's the way in Flutter?
This is something you're going to run into whenever you're growing a platform. There's always other dark, scary corners full of spider webs that other people find that we don't. And when you're early on, there's more of them. And when you get further on, there's less of them, hopefully. But one of the things that does happen is people find other ways to build on top of it and say, I want this particular feature. I want, why don't you provide us this particular widget that does this particular animation or this particular platform capability? And yeah, those are great requests. And one of the things that we use those requests for is to understand where people are at in terms of the things that they're building and the things that they need in order to build it more effectively. Most of the time, we focus on fundamental core principle things, making sure that something that we build is going to be able to be used by a large quantity of people.
Adding new platforms and adding new ways to compile Flutter, isn't it, leads us to some, I don't know, valley of 100 core CPU where you cannot handle like complexity of this product?
The answer is yes, because there's sufficient layers of abstraction between writing Flutter code and having it actually run on the thing. So we have those layers where the framework compiles down to the Dart VM, which is actually the thing that runs on the device. And so from that perspective, from the user's perspective, there's not a lot of complexity to manage there as we expand out the platforms. That is something we do think about because you're right. If we want to be able to say, even that we support Android, that it moves forward. Android releases new versions and changes the underlying things, just like every time there's a new version. And so there are things that we need to do to support that. Same with iOS, same with macOS, same with Windows and Linux and all the other platforms. And so yes, it is something that we do consider and have to think about. We are being very cautious. There are community efforts to run Flutter in other places, all over the place. There's some for Raspberry Pi and on Xbox and on other places. We hope to leverage in some ways of getting those longer tail of platform support, the things that there is a community for, but in terms of the core fundamental product, that it's not necessarily part of our primary goals. The code to run it and compile it to some other platform is available, and you can write your own.
Fuchsia. In Russian, we call it Fuchsia. In English, it's called, I know that in Spanish, it's called kind of like really strangely. But okay, what does it mean for a Flutter team? Because they released this operation system. So what does it mean for you?
It's another platform. We have those abstraction, different layers of abstraction to be able to handle those different platforms. The two questions there are the same as the other two questions I had, is how do you write an app that runs on that platform, and how do you make sure that the framework can run on that platform? And we're thinking about both those questions, absolutely. And there's not a whole lot to say on that yet, at least not in this forum. But yeah, it is something that we are thinking about. I can't say exactly how yet.
Do you see that Flutter in 5 years will become this, I don't know, 1,000 people will work on Flutter, or still they're going to be some like gold ratio of developers and advocates?
There is a approximate range of a good number of developers, and it's smaller than you think. And the reason it's smaller is so that you have that pressure to prioritize the right features for your product. If you have a million developers and you can do whatever you want, literally whatever you want, then like, what is the product at that point? If it can expand to an infinite number of features, I don't know. And so I think the right number is whatever stage you happen to be at is a little bit smaller than you might expect.
You are with Google for a pretty long time, and you've been not in Google but in Amazon and other companies. So what's special for you about Flutter team or / Google team, or like maybe from programming perspective or from people perspective?
If I show someone how to do something and I help them build something, you can see the result of that immediately. It's a very front-end heavy, let's make this thing that people can use and touch, and let's make it together, and let's try to enable not just us as developers, but also the actual users of the app to be able to do something. What draws me to Google is we are building a technical product. Let's focus on the technical things, and then we have our specialties outside of that. So as a developer advocate, I specialize in storytelling and education, and the product managers are going to focus on product roadmaps and definitions, and the engineers are going to focus on the engineering, just wholesale. And then, but we all have that foundation of engineering, and then we all base ourselves in that engineering, and that's one of the things that's really nice.
Everyone has own recipe to saving our mind from this like burnout and remote fatigue and other stuff. What's your way to relax, or maybe find what do you do after long busy day of remote meetings?
Sometimes it's just getting out of the screen and doing things like just going for a walk, and more so it's just doing something that is not not technology. The very last thing I'll say maybe is there's always things that people can do to improve the experience of using a technical product that don't require deep, ingrained, very specific, very knowledgeable knowledge of the thing that you're using. You don't have to be a perfect expert in the thing in order to be a good developer relations engineer on something.
Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to have you here, to see you, maybe not in person, but hopefully that world will return to the normal state. And thank you very much for being here with us, dear listeners and viewers, and see you next time.